segregated that you didn't, growing up, you didn't necessarily have to interact with white people? That sounds weird the way I put it, but talk about that a little bit.
Well, I grew up in an area in Atlanta called Buttermilk Bottom, and for a long time we didn't know why they call it Buttermilk Bottom, but some say it's probably because many of the people survived because they lived off buttermilk and cornbread. That was a staple, a family staple. But it was a great little community because it was self-contained. We had we had doctor's offices, lawyer offices, we had bowling alley, theaters, drugstores, soda fountains, and of course we had our churches. So we had everything that you would want at that particular time within the black community, and our interaction with whites were very limited. For my family, we had a milkman who was white, and we also had one of the insurance collectors. They used to come by weekly, and God, they used to do they had nickel policies and penny policies. That was the thing of the day. And when you died, it didn't really pay very much, but it was just kind of give them something to do. But can you imagine paying a nickel a week for a burial policy? But that's the kind of it was when we grew up.
Okay, how's that level sound? So are you recording?
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right, so, well, now a little bit more about growing up here in Atlanta. I mean, on some levels, what you just said sounds good in terms of, this is a weird question, but growing up, what were some of your early feelings about race and white people in terms of how, was there always a level of fear about interacting with white people, or?
No, in our basically we were a kind of blended community because in Atlanta, blacks weren't the only ones who were marginalized. You had the Jews that were marginalized. You had Greeks and and Chinese and Japanese. So, for example, we had a Chinese laundry and a Japanese restaurant. A Greek guy ran a soda fountain, and a lot of the poor whites they had little mom-and-pop stores in our neighborhoods. And the thing is, these groups who were marginalized, they didn't have a lot of problems because they associated with us. For example, many of the Jews in the community, what they did because they had the finances, they had the streets name changed. There's an area in Atlanta called Virginia Highlands, and you go there and the streets are named St. Charles, St. Augustine, St. Catherine, and so forth. And the reason they named them that is because it was a Jewish enclave, and they didn't want people to know that that's what, and they had the greatest New York style delicatessen in the world there. And that's where, I grew up, I worked, my first job was in the neighborhoods. So I got a chance to interact with them on that level. So, it really threw a lot of us together in the community because other people felt safe and, not threatened by interacting with blacks.
Well, that's interesting. So it's a lot more nuanced than maybe the stereotypical view might be, like what I was just saying. But do we need to white balance, or are we cool on that?
We are.
Excellent. Okay, so now moving ahead a little bit, reading about you in the Wikipedia portrait, when you were in high school, you started to get involved with the NAACP. Can you talk about how that all happened? And I'm just curious why you decided to become active even when you were a high school student.
Well, I don't know if it was legal or not, but we had some seniors, they would go and they recruit us to join the NAACP Youth Corps. And what that did is expose us to voting and the importance of voting. And Georgia, Atlanta was unique. If you're in high school, if you're enrolled in high school, when you turn 18 or when you were either in the economics class or the American history class, took us en masse down to be registered to vote. So, and it was very simple. All you had to do was read one line out of the Georgia Constitution or the U.S. Constitution, and that qualified you. We didn't have poll tax, and we didn't have those stupid questions like they did in a lot of places in Alabama and Mississippi, those questions that no one had answers to. which was designed. You had people in South Georgia and other places where PhDs could not even register to vote because of the way they phrased the questions, and like how many bubbles in a bar of soap, or how many nines in a bunch of nines. I mean, questions that really had no answers. But we didn't, in Atlanta, we didn't have that problem. Once you turned 18, or you were going to be 18 by voting time, then they allowed you to register.
Well, now, so what motivated you to become involved politically as a young man?
Well, I had always heard about. Well, I had a liking for the head of the NAACP. He was a very articulate man, and he made a lot of sense. And especially after the success the NAACP had with the Brown versus Board of Education, that ruling showed that they had a little bit of clout, and they had a lot of good people involved in their litigation. So that was one of the reasons to become involved as a young person.
Were there how many young people like at your high school were into this?
Probably about, well, I guess they went by grade level, but in my group there was about 20 of us, which was a good number to have a good meeting without bogging it down with a lot of wasted time. Because in high school, you got other things to do, if you're involved in extracurricular activities, sports, and so forth. So they made it very easy for you to become a member, but also it kept us informed about a lot of things that was happening, not only in Atlanta, but around the country.
Now, take us through, what years are we talking about when you were in high school?
We didn't have middle school and all that stuff in those days. You left elementary school. Elementary school went from, they didn't have kindergarten either, went from 1 to 7, and high school went from 8 to 12.
Okay, hang on just a second. Is that his mic aimed up? The actual, let me see. I can't quite tell.
Yes. Yeah, it's facing the bottom of his throat. Yeah, it's aiming up.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so now, we'll wait till this thing's done. Well, we'll put this right in the middle of the movie. All right. So again, what years were we talking about?
1955 to 1960.
Well, so what was going on in the civil rights movement during those years?
Well, nothing really. Well, during that period of time, of course you had the Montgomery bus boycott. You had Little Rock, integrated into Little Rock in '58, I think it was. Those were the major issues, and I think that's what brought to the forefront the images of Little Rock, especially. It was very chilling how they attacked, even parents trying to escort their kids to school, and the things they had encountered. So that was really a telling point, because we were all looking for better education, because in high school I never had a new textbook, and most of the equipment in our school was hand-me-down. They used to stencil all the properties. So here you are, my name of my high school was David T. Howard High School, and you've got Bass High, which was the closest white high school. We got their hand-me-downs. All their furnishings that they, when they got new furnishings, we got their old. When they got new books, we got their old books, which kept us behind. But which is ironic, because when they started integrating the universities, in flagship universities like University of Georgia, Georgia Tech, and so forth, many of the Georgians were astonished to see how blacks were able to qualify, because they had given us obsolete textbooks for years and years and years, and they didn't understand how we were able to overcome those, deficiencies. But see, we had a hidden agenda. We had teachers that knew what it took to be successful, and what they did is they brought in supplemental material that kept us current, so that we weren't 2 or 3 years behind like our textbooks were. So that's the one, and that's why it was so amazing when they said, "Well, how did these kids qualify? How can you pass the SAT? How did you get that kind of score on the ACT?" And that was hard, because our teachers, they were really, they are the unsung heroes, because most people didn't realize what they were doing, I guess it was really surreptitiously because it wasn't a part of the curriculum, but they knew that if they followed the curriculum, we would always be 2 to 3 years behind.
Those sound like some people we should try to find.
I recommended that, but so many of them are dying now. I said, if all the money we put into education, if they would bring some of those people back and pick their brains before they die, and so how were you able to do this? How you're able to achieve this? Because here you got to realize that these are supposed to be underperforming schools. And like, for example, I was accepted at MIT in 1960, yet I couldn't get into Georgia Tech. And you figure, well, how did you score that well on the SAT, or how did you have the GPA to qualify? So those are kind of things that a lot of people don't understand. That how we were able to do certain things when it was deliberately determined that the money was not coming to our school. Everything was hand-me-downs. And one of the things that really bothered me about that is our business classes. The rest of the world had come down to little portable typewriters. We had those old Remington monstrosities. They were about 3 times as high as a normal typewriter, and it took the strength of an elephant to kind of press the keys down. But that's what even our office workers were using that. Where in the white high schools, they had the nice little Selectrics and all the other nice little office equipment. So
much for separate but equal.
Yeah, they were separate, but definitely was not equal.
Yeah. Well, now, so some of your classmates at high school were also into being involved in the movement as well, right?
Well, it depends. Yeah, there were some of us who were what you'd call activists, and then you had others I would call supporters. For example, out of my high school class, I don't think anyone, maybe one other went to jail and did some other things, but the others, because their parents wouldn't allow them to, they did stuff behind. They made picket signs, they made sandwiches, they did other things that they could do that would not expose them to either being arrested or being attacked. So a lot of people were involved, but you only had a small group that were what you'd call activists. And like this, we were on the picket lines that we were sitting in every day.
Okay, well now, what was the first? What was the first time when? Talk about when there was some incident where you got arrested. Was that when you were at Morehouse?
That was at Morehouse.
Talk about what happened there.
Okay, when the freshman class entered in September of 1960, well, they had already had the episode in North Carolina with the 4 students sit-ins. And what we were determined to do is that the student leaders were determined to replicate that here in Atlanta. So they met with we have 5 universities here, and all the 5 presidents got together, and they went to talk to the school presidents. And the presidents of in the AU Center said, you must publish and let society know what your intentions are and why you're going to be doing these kinds of things. So what they did is they took out an article, and a 4-page article in the 2 Georgia papers, the Atlanta Journal and the Atlanta Constitution. It also appears, I think, in the New York Times. And it was a manifesto to explain all the inequities that exist in job training and the accommodations, be theaters, restaurants, hotels, etc., and churches. And once that was published, then they allowed us to continue with our demonstrations.
So what was this first demonstration? Did you get arrested in this?
Well, I didn't get arrested in the first. And the first one that was happening right, because I was a freshman, is that they started to sitting in at some of the major apartment stores. And what they did is they encouraged Dr. King to join us. That's when he got arrested in October of 1960. And that's the one when the Kennedys interceded and exchanged a lot of black votes, because many blacks in those days voted Republican. But after the reaction of the Kennedy administration calling Mrs. King, a lot of blacks switched their vote, and of course he won the election in 1960. By this time we were well organized, and after the new year, after the election, the new year, and we were encouraged. And we had a major turnout in our sit-ins. And we decided to adopt a jail no bail. And that was in February. And we were averaging over 70 students a day being arrested. And I was arrested the first day. And they bound us over and we to court. And we said, well, no, we're not going to post bail. And we went to the prison. It was a brand new prison too, by the way. It had pastel colors. They piped in music. It was something unique. We couldn't have asked for a better scenario. But we got in, and also the prisoners who were normally there, they said the food improved while we were there. Also, they did not put the students in cells by themselves. They mixed us up with other prisoners. So you had this dichotomy of bad guys, good guys. But they admired us because, like I said, that things improved. Their overall lot improved while we were there. And one day we used to sing. We would sing to let the other people know what was happening, how many students were arrested that day, or anything that was out of turn. We would just change the stanza to tell the other students what was going on. So one day we were singing, and they said I was singing too loud, so they decided to put me into solitary confinement. So I spent 10 days out of the 16 in solitary confinement. And that was a sobering experience because it was in a small room, like it's about an 8 by 10. You had a bunk in there with no sheets, no mattress cover, anything, just a naked mat, and the lighting in, I think there was about a 40-watt light bulb that gave you, no external light, and you couldn't see on the outside. So there you are, you couldn't have any reading material and stuff like that in solitary. So all you had was your own thoughts, and that for me was at first rather nerve rattling, but finally I learned to deal with it. And I think really all in all is that experience in solitary confinement. It helped me survive Vietnam because I didn't have any fears, or I wasn't rattled like I should have been, because I think back over the time, I said there's a lot of times I probably should have been afraid and I wasn't. And maybe it's my youth, or maybe just my youthful stupidity or what, but...
Okay. Fausto, this sounds stupid, but have you ever gone in and made sure to focus?
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe let's move a little tighter on them.
Sure.
So how old were you when you were in solitary confinement?
I was 18.
Wow. I know that from what I've heard that solitary confinement, well, year in, year out, can turn people insane.
Yeah.
But so they took you to solitary confinement. Now, were the guards white or?
Oh, of course.
What were they saying? What was all that like? I mean,
how
they treat you young guys?
Well, they were in some sense, why would anybody deliberately stay in jail when they could get out? That's one of the things the white jailers were confused by. The black kids they realized, once they realized while we were in there, they supported us. They were really very helpful because they knew the system. We didn't know the system. It was quite an experience because I had never been in jail, and it convinced me I don't want to go again. It's that kind of experience. I would hate to have my freedoms curtailed, but for the reason we were there, it was okay. But for some other reason, I would have nothing to do with that.
So talk about what was the outcome of so you spent 16 days in jail, which was quite a long time. I've been arrested a couple of times. I was arrested the Moral Monday thing up in, be 5 years ago this summer. My wife and I were both arrested. We made the decision. And it's interesting because we went to a church, the Reverend Barr, they said, look, you're not going there to get arrested. You're going to this state capitol to protest and to speak your mind in the governmental body, and if that leads to your being arrested, that's why it happens. It's not to get arrested. No, it's there to commit civil disobedience, and that very likely might lead to it. I think that's a very important distinction because people say, well, you went and got arrested. No, it sounded like you're just doing that for kicks or something. So, so that was, for an 18-year-old, that's a pretty remarkable thing. How did your I don't. Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have brothers and sisters.
Were they involved with all this stuff?
No,
Were they younger, older, or?
Well, I was the oldest, and I didn't realize the impact they had on the family. It's something they withheld from me because even my mom didn't really relate to me how they felt. I think there was a certain amount of pride, but also I think when I was in jail and and in other instances that they were vitally concerned and I wasn't aware of it, and one of these days if I write a book, some of their stories hopefully we're getting brought into it because, for example, my mother just passed this year, and we were doing a road trip to go see my brother who was in a VA hospital suffering from the complications of Agent Orange. And when we stopped at rest stops along the way, and we stopped at a Chick-fil-A restaurant along the way, and my mom, she says to me, "I'm glad you guys did what you did." I said, "What do you mean, Mom?" She said, "I remember taking this road trip many, many years ago, and there were no restaurants that they could stop and eat. And of course, they wouldn't have the rest stops." And she said, "It's because, if they had to do the party, they had to do it along the roadside." And she was just saying the difference between then and the way it is now is so much easier to, and especially growing up, it was easy for the boys because for us to tinkle, all we had to do was go find a tree somewhere. But for a young girl, it was a lot different. And in those days, girls didn't wear pants. So here you are, you're trying to negotiate a skirt or a dress, and you're trying to squat down between the doors of a car. That's the only privacy they had. And, it was not a nice thing. And I can understand, I can understand what Mom was saying, is that how difficult it was to travel and, not being able to stop and use facilities or getting the thing to eat along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, teaching college kids, they really, look back at all that like it's a movie in black and white or something. But it's really not that long ago.
No, it hasn't been that long ago at all.
When you think about it. Okay. So, one thing you were quoted saying is that being active was infectious, that when you got the taste for it, you want to be there. So talk about that. I mean, I think people don't, I've been involved with a fair amount of picketing and protests over the years against the war in Vietnam. I grew up in California. Doesn't make me an automatic protester, but I grew up in Berkeley, California.
So Bishop Pike? Do you know Bishop Pike?
No, I don't know Bishop Pike. But I was involved anti-war movement. In Berkeley was student movement.
Oh yeah,
free speech movement.
Yeah.
All that, and I was just one of the people. I was out there like a soldier, kind of like marching.
But it gets in your blood, and it's you don't know, you don't have the expectation that you're gonna do something earth-shattering, but you realize that you become a part of the process. You figure this has got to lead to something better, and I think that was what it was about. And what encouraged me the most is I had the greatest classmates, because when you're sitting down at a lunch counter where they're not going to feed you, you have a lot of time to do your studies. So what my classmates did, they make sure I got my assignments. I could do them while I'm sitting in, and they would get them turned in. So it was good academically, except Morehouse had a silly policy that you had to have quality points as well as your GPA. So even though I had in most of my classes, I had a B or A average, even not attending class. But because I had so many unexcused absences, they took my quality points, which nullified, in those days, it nullified your GPA. In other words, you could have a 4.0 GPA, but if you didn't have excessive absences, it didn't count. Now, they finally gave it back to me years later, but for most of the people who were involved in the movement, it took them anywhere from 6 months to a year longer to graduate because of that. So
interesting. Okay, well, let's get to the big story here, which was the Freedom bus ride. So let's move a little tighter on them. In other words, when you went up to what, DC, then here, and then on down to Anniston, Alabama.
Okay, you want to tell the whole story?
The whole story.
I hope you're ready for this.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're
So
good.
okay.
After got noticed about the Congress of Racial Equality, that there were a lot of students throughout the country who had experience in nonviolence and in all types of protests. So they were going to conduct a freedom ride, and they asked for volunteers. Well, I volunteered along with several other members from Atlanta, and for some reason they chose me. It took me many years later before I realized why I was chosen to be a freedom rider. But anyway, I was summoned to Washington, D.C. for additional training. We spent 3 days in training to make sure that we were going to remain nonviolent. And the reason they needed additional training because many times you will do something inadvertently. In other words, you can say, I'm not going to strike back, but sometimes you can be approached in such a manner that you do inadvertently strike back or do something. So they wanted to make sure there was no chance of us being violent in any way, shape, or form. After that, we left Washington, D.C., and we were very optimistic and happy. And the only expectation we had of violence was that maybe they might squirt ketchup or mustard on us. They might even spit on us or put a cigarette out on us. And we know they might yank you off a stool, but that was about the extent of the violence that we had anticipated at that particular point. No one knew that violence could even get even more devastating than that. But in the northern states, everything went well until we got to Charlotte, North Carolina. And they wanted to arrest me for trying to get my shoes shined. Now, that was not a test that we were scheduled to make. But if you ridden a bus in any period of time back in the day, people threw stuff on the floor of the bus, and your shoes would get scuffed and kind of messed up. And if you notice, the one thing about the students, the boys normally always had on a shirt and tie, and the girls wore their Sunday best. So we were always dressed, and getting your shoes shined in those days was typical for most men. So I did. Once they attempted to arrest me, I got down from the stand, and one of the Corps members went there, and he was arrested because he was with the Congress of Racial Equality. That was Mr. Perkins who did that, and he was a great guy, and he spent 2 or 3 days in jail. Then he came in and really finally joined us back when we got to Atlanta. The next incident happened in Rock Hill, South Carolina, where John Lewis, and who's our congressman now, and Mr. Albert Bigelow were attacked, and they were beaten pretty badly. But when the police came and asked if they wanted to press charges, they said no. And John said that we were not about punishing individuals. We are out against the system of segregation. And it must have had an impact on these guys because several years later, one of the men who attacked John apologized to him. And that's the first time anyone had ever apologized to a freedom rider for the beating that they had given him. And he also reenacted that when we were on the Oprah Winfrey show, and it was national televised, where they could see that he really had some remorse for what he had done. After Rock Hill, we entered Georgia. Now, Georgia was smart. They either closed the lunch counters completely, or they let us in and we could eat and do what every other passenger could do. And we got into Atlanta, and we met with Dr. King and his staff. And we had hoped that Dr. King might join us. But he did not want to join us, but he warned us. He said, I have heard that terrible things await for you in Alabama. And he suggested that we not continue to ride. Well, we respected Dr. King, but we had a job to do. The next day was Mother's Day, and we left Atlanta in 2 buses, as always. We had a Trailway and a Greyhound. Those were the 2 main carriers. And each day, we would switch buses. In other words, if I came into Atlanta on a Greyhound, and I would leave on the next day, I would leave out on the Trailway. And the reason for that is so that no one could trace us, easily. I mean, it was, most of the time these buses had different schedules, 1 or 2 hours different between, the takeoffs and so forth. So this is one way to minimize anyone really tracking us, even though the FBI had our entire itinerary. They knew where we were supposed to be in each day. The first bus left Atlanta 2 hours ahead of us, and that was a Greyhound bus. And we didn't have any problems until we got to the Georgia-Alabama line. When we got there, a gentleman was getting off the bus, And he says to me, because my seat was the first one as you get on your left, as you get on the bus. And he says to me as he is door. At that particular point, someone drops a firebomb, a thermite grenade in the back of the bus. Now, the Fort McClellan is right near there, so they had all kinds of ammunition and stuff that they could get from the post there. And apparently it was a thermite grenade which burns through metal. It burns very hot and so forth. So the bus started to burn. At that point, there was an explosion, and it startled them, and they opened the door, and they let the freedom riders out. And as they got off the bus, many of them were hit with baseball bats. But while the bus was burning, the crowd, this is a group of folks who just come from church and so forth. They were out there chanting, "Burn those niggas alive." And it was just, it was just a horrendous scene. But by the time the freedom riders had gotten off the bus, highway patrolman got in and he pulled his weapon and he fired a couple of shots in the air and he said, "Okay, you've had your fun, move back." So the ambulance came to take them to the hospital. And they weren't going to take the black freedom riders. So the white freedom riders said, "Well, you're not going to take them, you can't take us." So I guess they got together and realized that there's been enough mess going on. So they decided to take them all to the hospital. Well, this crowd followed them to the hospital and they threatened to burn the hospital down. So at this point, the freedom riders called Reverend Shuttlesworth, who was in charge of the Birmingham Civil Improvement Organization, and they sent some people there to rescue the freedom riders. Well, back on our bus, the bus driver says, "I ain't gonna move this bus until the niggas get to the back of the bus," which is the students. Well, of course, we refused. At that point, about 8 men get on the bus, and they start punching with me and other students, and they punched us and they were forcing us to the center aisle of the bus, and they were forcing us towards the back. And when we got about midway of the bus, James Peck and Dr. Bergman, two white freedom riders, came to our aid. Now, Dr. Bergman was the oldest freedom rider. He was 62. And they hit him and they knocked him to the floor of the bus. And they began to stomp him in his chest. Dr. Bergman ended up spending the rest of his life in a wheelchair for the beating he received that day. Now, James Peck was a bleeder. Now, he was a very experienced freedom rider. He had been on the earlier ride that took place in 1947, the Journey of Reconciliation. So when he came forward, and they punched him, and he was a bleeder. And when he landed on the floor of the bus, his blood covered the floor of the bus. So here they are, they're forcing us all towards the back of the bus. We're slipping and sliding on James' blood. And eventually they got us all near the back of the bus, and someone said they physically threw us to the back of the bus. And they said they stacked us like pancakes in the back of the bus. At that point, the bus driver got on and says, he could move because the bus was resegregated. The policeman who had been standing out all along says, "Y'all don't worry," these are his words, "y'all don't worry about nothing. I ain't seen nothing. Don't worry about no lawsuit or anything." And if you notice that there is very little information about what happened in Anderson to the Trailway bus. We know what happened to us, the bus that was burned. But because we had no one in that town had any images of what happened or what took place on that, so we have very little information about what happened to the Trailway bus in Anderson.
Do you want some water?
Yeah, would you please?
Okay.
Absolutely.
Images that they hadn't been exposed before, and they exhibited those at the airport, and then at the new Civil Rights Museum that we have in downtown. These are images that came out of the woodwork since we were vying to be a national monument, and I think by the time we get the new that monument constructed, there's some of these things that happened on our bus will become known, because we had embedded on our bus a photographer and a reporter, and the photographer said he took pictures of the beating, but the company he worked for has never released them. And I don't know why. And I tried to get them released. I had some of the universities that came to visit me to write a petition encouraging people to the Johnson publication release those images, but to this point they haven't. So.
Okay. Can we go even tighter on them?
I would have to move the camera forward. Do you want to do that? Or do you want to keep it?
Are you
there?
zoomed out as much as or zoomed?
Yeah. It's a tight lens.
This is good.
Okay.
Well, how hard would it? I mean,
No, it's what you want to do. Let me stop recording. Okay.
After the bus was resegregated, the men the 8 Klansmen who attacked us sat there and taunted us all the way into Birmingham. Now, we took an alternate route into Birmingham because the bus driver had been warned that a mob was waiting down the road for us on the normal route. Had our bus been set afire, I don't know if we would have had the strength to get off because we had been beaten so badly. It took us 2 hours to get from Anderson to Birmingham. And if you ever did that route, you know that it's not a 2-hour ride. When we get to Birmingham, James Peck and I, we were the designated testers. So we get off the bus, and he looks at me, and I knew he had been beaten pretty badly. And I says that, and he was bleeding pretty profusely at the time, and says, let's go. So he and I, we entered the waiting room, and the entire wall of men came towards us. And they had everything. They had pipes and sticks, and some had guns. James went down almost immediately. Now, I, being younger or whatever reason, I was able to maintain my balance. Now, there's only one picture that survived Birmingham. It's a picture of me being beaten. And when the photographer took the picture, he surprised them, and they let me go, and they attacked him. They beat him up, and they thought they had destroyed his camera and all in the film. But it's one of those pack cameras, and only one image survived that. And I have a huge picture of that, of me being beaten. And out of that group, you see the guy that has a pipe, and he's the one who hit me in the head that created all of my problems. But they allowed me to just walk away. And I walked out of the terminal, out to the street. And as luck or fate would have it, a municipal bus, city bus, came by. I get on, and I says, take me somewhere. He took me about 2 blocks, and he says, if you go across the tracks, there'll be someone to help you. Now, if you know anything about the rural South, black folks always lived across the tracks because trains burn coal, and coal produces a soot-like powdery substance that gets on everything. So I go across the tracks, and I find a phone booth. And I had my trusted little dime, and I go in, and I call Reverend Shuttlesworth and told him what had happened, and they sent 3 deacons to pick me up. When the deacons got there, they said, you need to see a doctor. Well, there were 3 black doctors in Birmingham, and all 3 refused to treat me. So they took me back to the church, and they had a nurse there, and she put a special kind of bandage which was supposed to kind of pull my head together and so forth. And that's the only treatment I received. Now, it sufficed, but later, because I got no treatment, the wound, it would fester, and it would drain to the base of my skull. And eventually I had a knot on the back of my head about the size of my fist. And I was a little reluctant to have it removed because I thought maybe I had a knife blade or ice pick broken off in my skull. And I was, but with the advent of the MRI, I was able to have it, take a look and found out that there was nothing in there, and except that, it did drain. Had a great plastic surgeon, and he removed it, and all seemingly was okay. But I've later found within the last year that the doctor says there's some residual damage. And I won't deal with that. I mean, it doesn't bother me or anything, but I realize it's there. And I'll have to deal with it at some point. But anyway, we had a great mass meeting that night, and we met with the people of Birmingham. And the next night we were going to continue to ride. Well, we couldn't continue to ride because no bus driver would take us. They said they were not freedom riders and they were not going to be able to have their buses burned or whatever. So we caucused together and we said, well, what can we do? And we said, well, okay, we'll fly to New Orleans for our rally. So we go to the airport, and the crowd was beginning to follow us from the bus station to the airport, and it was getting really, really getting terrifying. We walk out to the plane and get on the plane. In those days, you didn't have the little, you had to walk out on the tarmac and to get on the plane. We get on the plane, and there's a bomb threat. So we had to get back off the plane, go back through that mob again. And, there were all kinds of catcalls. And with the help of Mr. Siegenthaler, he was an aide to Robert Kennedy, and he was able to expedite us a flight out of Birmingham into New Orleans, and there we had a riot. We had our rally, and it was encouraging because we wanted to continue, but we couldn't continue. But then the kids in Nashville, Tennessee had heard about the Freedom Rides, and they had a lot of trained people as well. So they didn't want the rides to be ended by violence. So they volunteered to take over, and they recruited some people, and they continued to march for us. And after they were beaten very badly in Montgomery, everybody got upset because there was over 200 Klansmen and 20 students. And there's a couple of them almost was killed. And there's an iconic picture of Jim Swerve standing on the building, believing he and John Lewis were attacked together. They were partners that particular day. And he just really turned the movement around. After that, they took the Freedom Riders directly into Mississippi. And Ross Barnett, he didn't want this violence, even though Mississippi had a reputation for being more violent. They didn't want violence. So what they came up with was if they entered the state of Mississippi and they entered a bus station or train station, they were going to be arrested for breach of peace. And it started off, there were 30 days sentence and a modest fine. And they figured that would discourage, but they kept coming. So they upped the fines, and they upped the number of days that they would have to stay in jail. In the end, we had over 230 Freedom Riders that were incarcerated in Parchment in Mississippi. And in the end, there were over 430 Freedom Riders. 50% were white, 50% was black, and 1/4 were women. And of the Caucasian, 1/3 were Jews. So we had quite a diverse population. Also, we had 10 foreign students involved in the Freedom Rides. But, eventually, in October of that year, all those signs came down, and it was one of the first successful campaigns where it affected the entire country. See, like in Birmingham, like the Montgomery March, it only affected Montgomery. In Atlanta, when we did segregated the Lunch County, it only affected Atlanta. It didn't affect the outlying cities. So what happened is that you had to replicate in each city those kinds of demonstrations. But with the Freedom Riders, said that it happened when they passed a law. It affected every city and every state. And that was one of the first blanket. And I think it really set the stage for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 65, because those two bills affected the entire country all at once.
Wow, what a story. And so, how old were you when all this happened?
I was 18.
And, I mean, to go through, yes.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
We gotta stop for a second.
Sure. Everything going okay?
Everything's going great. Just gonna change out some batteries. It's going really well.
These cameras are great, but they use battery power.
Oh, yeah, I imagine.
We just bought, our department we've been underfunded, speaking about underfunding, but we got about $200,000 worth of equipment this last summer, and this is one of the cameras. I'm more of a traditionalist. I like what I call a real video camera, the one you put over your shoulder.
Yeah.
This is basically a digital still camera that happens to be able to shoot video.
That's great.
It's remarkable, but you don't have a zoom lens that you can zoom in and out. But it's a beautiful camera, I must say.
I got an old single-end reflex. Nikon, yeah, and I said I guess I have to get rid of it because everything now between your iPads and your iPhones and all that stuff, it's people don't have any hard copy films. You want to show your picture, you pull out your phone.
I know. The problem, I did still photography for a number of years. I still have a beautiful camera that shoots film. Yeah. The problem is getting it processed is becoming challenging now. Especially not just the 35mm format. This one shoots a bigger format, 120 size.
Wow.
Like a Hasselblad is the famous Swedish-built camera, the one that went to the moon. You know, but there's a lab in Greensboro, Mastercolor lab, that just shut down last week. They just aren't making it financially. You know, even for people that, you know, so it's all changing very fast. That's the problem. You can buy a camera like this, and it's probably out of.
Yeah, that's the bulk of it. The rest is just mostly, well, for me, like I didn't understand why they had chosen me to be a freedom rider. And what it is that because of J. Edgar Hoover's penchant for finding a communist on every bush, they wanted to make sure, first of all, that you had very little or nothing in your background to that was derogatory. And because I was so young, I hadn't done anything negative. I had nothing negative in my background. And, you know, so that was one of the reasons they chose us. But also, at the time, the nation was homophobic. So, you know, we all also know that one of the most famous men with the March on Washington was a homosexual. And see, and they who were try to use those kind of scenarios to use against the movement to discredit the movement. It's so bad, and that when we wrote our manifesto for the Atlanta movement, the governor didn't believe it was written by students, white or black, and he even went so far as to say, I don't think it was even written in this country. It let them know that they were not aware of the competence that of the students. You know, it's just amazing. Like I say, that they knew that they had embedded so many negative things in our education that they felt it was impossible for us to come up with something that was so well written. And so, I mean, even today, it's what, 50-some years later, it's a well written document.
Well, that reminds me of some Southern senator, I can't remember who said, "I'm just amazed at how well Obama speaks." I wish I could speak that well. Well, you know, I just want to go back to, you know, I mean, when I compare our arrest, even though, you know, we were put in leg chains into downtown jail in Raleigh until we got released. We were released that night, you know, 12 hours, 10 hours later, whatever. Not even that. I was never worried about being beaten up, you know. But in terms of the fear level, that must have been terrifying. I mean, you know, what was it like when these guys got on the bus? These are members of the Klan, I guess, right?
Right.
What did they look like? I mean, they were just white guys.
Well, they look typical farm workers. They had that weather look. Someone was as dark as me from being in the sun. Rather leathery skin, you know, dark, and you know, they just didn't. I don't know who put them up to it, and that's one of the goals of my life. I wish before I leave this earth, and before all of them leave, I would love to just sit down and have a cup of coffee and just to find out, you know, wait, what were you guys thinking? You know, what was it all about? I was 5'6", 126 pounds. I was no threat to anybody. So I know you could say I was threatening. But I just, you know, really like to know if they can recall what was their motivation, because they had never seen me before. I'd never been, you know, in that town before. But you know, to how you can generate that much hatred. And the thing what got me is not so much the words they said, but how their faces were contorted with hate. You know, they really hated us. And that's what I can't understand. As a young person, I could never realize. And I probably should have been afraid. You know, I probably should have been afraid. But, you know, the movement was bigger than I. It wasn't about me. It was what we were trying to achieve. And I think in that regards, it was successful, and also it was worth, you know, what we had to put up with to achieve it. Because, you know, my kids now, they know about the movement, but they travel freely throughout this country and throughout the world. And so they, you know, in that regard, I guess we were successful.
Absolutely, no question. But high price to pay. That you were talking about some guy who basically was beaten up so badly he was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
So talk about, I mean, He paid a very high price.
Yeah, Dr. Bergman was quite a guy, and he and his wife both. He was 62 and she was 58, and they kind of adopted me, and they had been involved in other movements up in Detroit and Michigan. So they were very experienced at that, and they just kind of took me under their wings. And what made the Freedom Rise so unique for me is that even though I was a young person, and another young person, like we had a couple of 19-year-olds, is that they would listen to us, and we had something to bring to the conversation. It wasn't like, well, you kid, no. If you had something to say, because they knew we were all veterans of some movement and so forth. So they, if we had something to contribute, it was listened to. And so you felt that you were a contributing part of this movement. And we were a very tight knit group. And until, right now there's only one survivor on the Greyhound bus. That's Hank Thomas. He's the only survivor and of Freedom Riders. Now there's one other person who's on there that was with us. He was a reporter for the Baltimore, a newspaper out of Baltimore. On our bus, there was three. It was myself and the photographer and reporter. And of course, I told you the reporter just passed 2 or 3 days ago. So now there's only two from the Greyhound and two from the Trailway that's alive.
Okay, why don't we go back to a wider shot so we can see, and include, of course, the medals. We want to talk about those medals.
Okay.
So you were in Vietnam.
Yeah.
We want to talk about that. Okay. Well, you talked about some of the other people, the activists on the bus. So after going through a Syrian experience like that, we'll talk about what happened with your life after. I mean, it was must have been kind of hard to go back to reality. Not reality. This is talking about reality, but to normalcy, whatever that. After going through something that huge.
Okay, what happened after that? And this is amazing. When I got returned to Atlanta from New Orleans, the Assistant Attorney General came to my home in Atlanta and took my deposition on what had happened. They had pictures of the guys, like I say, and by this time they had identified them. And that's one of the fastest trials, because the week that the other Freedom Riders were in the church there, and they were having all the problems in Montgomery with the crowd outside, and they were going to threaten to burn the church down. I was across town and at the trial of the people who beat us up. And of course, we spent a week at the trial, and it was just a shenanigans, because they weren't going to punish those guys for beating up on us. But we went through the trial for a whole week. After that, I returned home, and my mom knew that I was going to stay in the movement, so she suggested I join the Army. Because I would have stayed in the movement. I probably would have been arrested in Parchment, and I would have stayed with it. But the day that the Army was looking for blacks to be in their West Point, and I went and took all their stuff. And the day that I was supposed to go take my physical to go to West Point, I went down and joined the Marine Corps. And they had trouble getting me in Corps because I had an arrest record. And what happened, since they didn't have a good case, they took my case and put it on the dead docket, which technically prevented me from leaving the state. So my recruiter went down and talked to them, and they released me so I could join the Marine Corps. And that was another experience. And the Marine Corps boot camp was like typical Marine boot camp. And my DI, he liked me because I could march and I could shoot. But when he found out I had the highest IQ in the platoon, he tried to force me out. He tried to do kind of things to try to make me quit. But he should have known I was not a quitter. So after he realized he wasn't going to force me out, when we got to, I guess, close to the end of training, they messed with my rifle. And I've been shooting, from the 500-yard line, I'm shooting, 48, 49s from the 500-yard line. And I don't know if you know what that's like, but you're shooting at a target about, I think, a 25-inch target from 500 yards. And to put, 8 or 9 in the black from 500 yards is a pretty good shooting. But anyway, somehow my sights fell off on pre-qual day, which is a Thursday. Now, at the time I didn't realize it, but the sights are put on with an Allen wrench, an Allen tool, and for it to fall off is almost impossible on its own. So then I had to go back out and try to pre-qualify it on Thursday afternoon. And of course, on qualification day, I didn't have the right windage and all that, and I went unk. So I had to go on. I missed it by a very few points, but the thing is, I didn't have the correct windage and all that other stuff to be able to be successful. But I got out of boot camp and everything, and I learned an awful lot, and I was able to help a lot of people along the way, a lot of senior people along the way. In fact, one little lieutenant didn't know how to write an SOP for communication, and he asked me, and I wrote him one, and he got all kind of attaboys. So he in turn tried to do something in turn for me, and he got me promoted, meritoriously promoted, and stuff like that. And but I had a good career. I mean, I really I advanced quite rapidly, because I was made E4 under 4, and that was in the back in the day. That was almost unheard of. But like I said, academically, that was no problem. Because I had a good grades in school. I mean, like when I graduated from high school, I had a 3.82 GPA, and of course my SAT scores were very good. So I mean, that kind of stuff was easy for me. And somehow I was a good shooter because my grandfather taught all the boys in the family how to shoot early, because he had a reason. He grew up in the, I think it was the first generation out of slavery, and he used to say never again, but he never told us why never again. But he had an arsenal. He would probably be looked at as a potential threat nowadays with the arsenal he had back in the day, But he kept his weapons well maintained. But he's quite a guy. But he made sure all the boys in the family, we could shoot, and we could shoot well.
So were you in Vietnam?
Yeah, I was in Vietnam, and I tried to volunteer to Vietnam. In the early years, they wouldn't let me go because I was not a career Marine. But eventually, I was in the second group of Marines to go to Vietnam, and we were most all volunteers. I mean, my boss, he came to our organization. He needed to put together a detachment, so he asked for volunteers, and I was like one of the ones who volunteered. And that's why we had very few problems, disciplinary problems, because everybody in my organization we were volunteers.
What year were you in Vietnam?
65, May of 65.
Did you see combat over there?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's a little off track, but what was that like?
Well,
after all you'd been through over here.
Well, in fact, it was. I guess it was better because I had a weapon too. Even though I chose a shotgun was my weapon of choice. I didn't like I had started off with the M14, and I didn't. It's big and noisy, and then they got the M16, which was having all kinds of problems and stuff. So my weapon of choice was a pump shotgun, and because of the vegetation, I mean, you didn't have many times when you sit back and like you're on the firing line firing, it's like, boom, you turn around and you shoot. And I got along well with my colleagues because they thought I was crazy. And whenever we went on a sweep or in the foxholes, I had plenty of volunteers. And I guess they figured, this nigga's crazy and I want to be with him because he's going to stay alive. And that was my mantra, was to stay alive, because, a lot of people worried about this and they worried about that. And I'm saying the thing is, as a young person, you're more concerned about staying alive, because at the time we had no idea the effect that Agent Orange would have on us. We didn't even know what it was. All we knew is that when you wake up in the morning, many times your sleeping bag or your tent was all covered with this mist and stuff. And we didn't realize this stuff would come back to get us many, many years later. And like every member of my family that went to Vietnam was exposed to Agent Orange, and they are suffering some kind of disability at this point in their lives. My brother died 2 years ago from exposure to Agent Orange. And I got a cousin that I guess his pancreatic cancer is in remission, but he's got other ailments, and I need to call him because when I don't hear from him in a while, I know that he's going through some stuff.
So talk about those medals that are on.
Well, of course, and when combat, you get awarded campaign medals and so forth. They didn't give us any for Birmingham and Anniston, but for all the military places I went there, we saw action or combat. They awarded us medals.
Very impressive. You've been through so many life and death situations in your life. I mean, you could have been killed by that bus. I mean, people get beaten to death, or that gentleman you're talking about was in a wheelchair for the rest of his life from that beating. So how did you deal with the fear factor, or you didn't feel much fear?
I guess, like I said earlier, that I don't think because of my age or whatever, I was not afraid. Like when we were beaten, I didn't cover up. I didn't fight back. And I took the best shot. And I guess that's what was frustrating for them, that not to even cover up or anything like that. And, and I just walked away. And I guess it's because of the movement. And also we prayed. Now, I was not a ministerial student, but I had a very simplistic prayer. Lord, take care of me. I would say the Lord's, the 23rd Psalm, which he says, it'll protect you in time of evil. And we sang a lot. Now, we sang a lot of freedom songs. And if you listen to the songs and the ones that we chose, it gave us the desire to be our best, to do, because we felt that we could be successful in our endeavors. And I think that's one of the reasons. But no, I should have been afraid a lot of times, but I really was not. And also, I knew the students that I was with were going to had my back. See, it's not, it's one thing like just you didn't do anything alone. You had a partner, either like James Peck and I, or whomever, Dr. Bergman. You had someone to take you back. There's someone's going to be there. And if something happens to you, also it was going to be reported back, and somebody's going to take it. Like if you were arrested, someone's going to report that you were arrested, so that you wouldn't end up being missing.
Hold on.
Oh,
sorry about that.
Yeah.
Now is he gonna ring 5 times?
So
how are we doing?
We got 12 minutes on this card before we got to pop on the other one. So let's say probably another 5 minutes on this, and then we'll switch cards.
Very good. Well, I think one of the deepest human fears is of being beaten up or, assaulted. So they're saying so much. We were talking about this on the way down, with movies, because we both are involved with movies, and these movies like Pulp Fiction or whatever that glorify violence. That's the main. If you took the violence away from the movie, you wouldn't have a whole lot left. And this country, not just this country, violence on television all the time, or violence is the answer. So I guess my question here is, in the area, I think it's very hard for people. The idea of nonviolence is a hard pill to swallow. How can you get beaten up or even have a cigarette put out on you or ketchup squirt, and not want to fight back? I mean, the film Selma, there's a moment there after they get beaten up on the bridge where somebody, I forget what character says, that's it, let's go, let's fight, but we're that faith in nonviolence is, I know, was central to the movement, but what about that? I mean,
well, some people adopted it as a tactic. In other words, they were not nonviolent, but they realized if the movement was going to be successful, that they couldn't strike back. And if you recall, in Dr. King's last march, his movement was infiltrated by some kids, young people, and they created a riot. Well, see, he had never had that happen to him. And when I talk to Black Lives Matter kids today, I tell them, I said, first of all, we don't do anything at night because people can infiltrate your movement that have a different agenda from you. We had all our people throughout the march to make sure that no one had a Molotov cocktail or do anything out of the way. That's the kind of organization we had. And it really affected Dr. King that he had that happen to him. But at the time, he didn't realize that his march had been infiltrated. So we know that nonviolence work. In fact, I chose it as a way of life. And in fact, I've gone even further. And if I would like to start a movement in America, we have the so-called pro-life, but it only has to do with fetuses. My pro-life goes beyond that. When I say pro-life, I mean I'm against executions, and also I'm against war, because people are killed there. If you're pro-life, you want to preserve life in all its aspects. But why is it that many people who profess to be pro-life are adamant for the death penalty? So, but nonviolence, I think, is a moral high road to take for a reason, because it teaches you that you can forgive. There's nothing you can do that's going to make me angry and stay angry at you, because hatred affects me even greater, because it eats on me, and it's a waste of my time to be hating you or hating anyone else. Of course, I get angry, but for the moment, like since 45, the president, he upsets me because I think he's done a lot of things that has undermined the country. But I mean, even when I'm on active duty, because you're apolitical or non-political when you're in the military, you're supposed to be. And a lot of those guys didn't always have the policy that I went along with, but my job was to protect the country, so regardless of what my own personal beliefs are. But see, now in my old age, I can say that, hey, there are things that we can do to make our country better, and make us better as we look at the world. Because right now, we've been at war for over 20 years. I talk to kids now and say, we've been at war longer than you have been on this earth. And we're getting good at it because we've been doing it for so long.
Okay, why don't we hold it here, and he's going to change back. Hold that. He's there now. He emailed me. Like I was telling him about doing this interview. And he'll be involved as one of the consultants along with Dr. Curtis Austin as we start to try to raise money to do this. Because, and then it also brings up the question, when did the Civil Rights Movement, it's still, everybody looks at these days as the class, and they were, but it's still going on today. I mean, Black Lives Matter is certainly part of the Civil Rights Movement. And
Reverend Barr and his Moral Monday, which we have some representatives here in Atlanta that also, and Bob Zellner, a good friend of mine, he's actively involved. I don't know if you know Bob personally.
I went to the SNCC.
Oh, okay.
Were you there at Shaw University about 6 years ago? That's where Danny Glover was the keynote speaker, and that's the first time I met Danny Glover through my friend Curtis Austin. And that led to him doing the narration years later for the film. Took a while to make it happen, but he did it for free, and he's an extremely wonderful person. But Bob Zellner was at that SNCC reunion.
No, I was another card-carrying member of SNCC. I worked with SNCC, and I worked with a lot of other organizations. I could have been there, but we had just done the Mississippi freedom thing for 50th anniversary, and some other. So we in fact, we had reenacted. I went with the students. We reenacted the whole thing again with 40 students throughout the country, which was the student freedom rides, and that was a very good experience, because these young people, they went through a lot of the things that we went through, and when they had an epiphany when we got to Anniston, you won't believe it. We met some people there, and the town was trying to recruit young people, and the town had changed because when we had gone through there on the 40th anniversary, I refused to get off the bus. I don't have nothing to do with the town of Anniston. But at the 50th, I was so amazed that a town could change, and I realized that they were genuine, and it was just such a change in the attitudes. But what had happened is what brought them to their senses is all the young people, when they got to be 18, 19, they left, and they couldn't get them to come back. So they were doing all kinds of things to recruit young people. They had one of the best bike trails in the country in Anniston. And of course, they have this golf tour thing where they have some of the finest golf courses in the South are there. But they're trying to do all kinds of things to recruit young people, because the stigma attached to the town and other things, the kids just don't want to be a part of it. Because they say even in Africa, people, citizens from Addison who go to Africa, they say, oh, you're in the town where they burned the bus.
I think Charlottesville is going to have some of that sting Well, speaking about Charlottesville, let's talk about that. In other words, when that must have been. I mean, it's profoundly shocking, disgusting to everybody what happened there. But the hatred and the beating that one guy with these. How did that?
Well, I think that would affect most of us, especially us who are ex-military, is how you can celebrate with a Nazi flag. I mean, enough trouble with the Confederate flag, and you can halfway kind of justify it, even though it's not history. And like I tell people, we don't have statuary to glorify Hitler or Mussolini and other enemies of this country. So why would you want to make a monument to others who fought against this country? Because at the time they were fighting, it was not in the country's best interest. And a lot of people say, well, it's a part of history. This depends on a lot of that stuff. If it's history, should be in a museum. And if you go to some of these capitals in the South, and I think in Virginia is probably the most profound, on the Capitol grounds there, they've got so much statuary. I mean, it's just, and I can understand why the people have the attitude that they have, because they're bombarded with these kind of images all the time. And people don't realize that images sometimes is subliminal. I mean, you see an image and, in your mind, it's associated one way or the other. And at first I was saying, well, why don't they remove them? But I have my opinion nowadays is that don't remove them, because our government is complicit in all those statuary. Have you ever gone to Stone Mountain?
No.
Stone Mountain has this image carvings on the side of the Confederate generals. And you know how that monument was funded? Well, the U.S. Treasury issued a commemorative coin of Lee and Stonewall, well, the two generals there. And the sales from those commemorative coins helped finance the carving on that mountain. And you go back, and in many places, you look at how the laws were written. It's in the city of Atlanta, but the city can't change it. It has to go to the state. And when you're talking about a state-wide referendum, you're talking about the entire state. And it's a lot different than mobilizing a group of people in Atlanta to oppose or support something. So there's a lot of complicity in there with the various governments. And I said the best way to do that is put a statue of Mary McLeod Bethune on that campus. Put any other, and also what about some Hispanic, and any. Since we are a nation of immigrants, we've got other lot of people who have contributed to the success of this country who would be pleased to have a statue of some of their ancestors on those grounds. And I figure that would be the best way to balance it out rather than remove them.
Well, now, in terms of what we're seeing now, one thing that we will make a documentary or maybe several documentaries out of the material that we're gathering right this minute. But I think a lot of people are scared that we're going the wrong way in this country. How you can have people with torches that look like something out of Nazi Germany, the famous Riefenstahl that made documentaries, about all that fascist imagery, and to have people say we will replace the Jews or whatever. I didn't understand what they were, but they came hoping to hurt or kill people.
Yeah.
And so, how do we need another civil rights movement? How do we get away from this hatred that I think with Trump is openly racist about all kinds of people, and so it's okay now again for some people feel like it's okay to be openly racist.
Well, that's the climate we have now, and I tell young people, I said, when I grew up, in America, we have a derogatory name for every ethnic group. I mean, you got Spics, you got Kikes, on and on and on and on and on. I said, but you guys don't know these names, and it's a good thing. But see, now they're coming back. And that's the sad part, because I know there's a generation. My kids, all the different names we have for every race. I mean, the Jap they may remember, or Kite, But up until recently, if you guys told a young kid, a millennial, what's a kike? What's a spick? they would have no idea. But now, with what's happened the last year or so, these old terms are coming back. And the problem is this, is education. And throughout our history, we have been restricted in some way or form about our education. Either there's no money provided, separate but equal, you name it. And I think until people realize that in this country, we are truly a nation of immigrants. But you got to realize also how we did the Native Americans and how we did slaves. You know what the textbooks are teaching now? And it blew my mind away because I was preparing for a group that came down from Schenectady last week. They're teaching in some textbooks that slavery, they don't say it's call them slaves. They say they were workers from Africa who came to help the Southern farmer. And you know what they call it? You know what they call the Trail of Tears? They said the Trail of Tears was the effort the American Indians moved out of the South to make room for the European settlers. That's what it was. So our kids are not even being taught the truth about what happened and why we had the Trail of Tears. And for me, that was an epiphany when I made my first pilgrimage to Little Rock, and I went there to see the Taj Mahal of high schools. And that school, even today, Little Rock Central High, is a hell of a building, and I can understand why they didn't want nobody to share it with anybody, because you got to realize this was in the 50s, and you look at that building now, and you realize what it was in the 50s, and you can understand why there was so much violence towards blacks. But also in Little Rock, the Trail of Tears crossed as they were headed west, and it tells about how many of them died making that trek. But also it says there's sole reason for it, and it said right on the placards right there along the river, Arkansas River, it says that the reason for the Trail of Tears is because of white men's desire for Indian land, and that's why they relocated them. But see, the textbooks are saying that, hey, it was voluntary. They moved voluntarily, and and if we could ever see, you got to realize that a lot of these alt-right groups and white supremacist groups are not aware that other people have made contributions in this country, because they figure only good thing to have in this country was happened by white people. But they have to realize that the number of inventions by blacks, and people invent things when they find it's tedious. You make things better because you say, hell, I don't want to do this. This is, I don't want to do it this way. So you look for a better way. That is the American way, is to find a better way to doing something that's boring, that's tedious, and what have you. And I think that if they were aware of the contributions that other nationalities have made to this country, then they would be open-minded. But they're so closed-minded, they don't realize that a lot of the things they enjoy was because of others who have come to this country, either voluntarily or otherwise, who made it so.
Yeah. I think for me, having been part in my own way of being a demonstrator over the years, and I did a documentary about hate crime. It's been one of the main films utilized to train law enforcement about how serious hate crime is. I just feel like, and then with the election of President Obama, and all these things, that we're actually in the right, things are kind of gradually getting better. And now it's been a bitter pill to think that, what are we going to do? Stop all that? But I think ultimately, like everything else, like the Nazi movement, it will fail. It will destroy itself, because it's insane and it's hard. And it's hard to maintain hatred. Hatred takes a lot of energy to keep going.
But what hurts, though, is you're going to have a remnant who just will not be educated. They will not. I think Americans are afraid about discussing race, unfortunately, because they don't believe that you can discuss race without being confrontational. I do it all the time. I hold no animosity for those people who beat us. I have none whatsoever. I don't hate anybody. And I can talk about it. I can say the N word or any other word. I'm not offended by it. But when I say it, not to incite anyone, but I want you to see the rawness of what we encountered. I mean, you can put it couch it in nice words, nice prose, and all that, but that's not the reality. Because when someone's screaming at you and yelling at you, they don't mean you well. And I think this is what people don't realize when you read it in a book. It's so, okay, you read it. Or they hit him in the head. Well, that's true, but it's not descriptive. In fact, the guy who just died, Simeon Booker, who was a reporter on our bus, he has one of the most graphic eyewitness account of what happened on our trailway bus. It's so graphic that I don't use it anymore. But he was just, how and he's in the back. He had a hole cut in the newspaper so he could watch it. But he said all of his years of civil rights reporting, he's one of the most violent encounters that happened that day. And he was a veteran. He's the one who broke the story on Emmett Till. And he's the one that encouraged Mrs. Till to display an open casket, so that the world can see what they had done to her son. So he was a very veteran of the movement. He was a very good writer, good reporter. And if you get us a chance to read it, it's if in Google Books, it's June issue of the Jet magazine, and that's where I first encountered. But then he has written a book that has, I think, a revised version of what happened on the bus.
Okay, so I think we've covered the story, unless there's something else you want to add to it at all or anything? In terms of what happened on the Freedom Rides, or, looking back, was this the most important thing that you ever did in your life, would you say?
Oh, no, I've had several milestones, but I think what I was important to me is to show that Americans of all nationalities can work together. And like I say, if you look at the composition of the total group of Freedom Riders, and see, you got to realize that only the first two groups were organized. We were at core, and the second group was in Nashville, Tennessee. Most of the others were just something to do. They said, "What are you going to do this summer?" "I'm going to be a Freedom Rider." We had a group of priests, rabbi, and ministers who came. They came together. It's just amazing. From almost every state in the union, someone came to be a Freedom Rider. People borrowed money to be a Freedom Rider. Well, I only had to borrow one way because once you got on the bus, you were not going to. Once they started arresting them in Mississippi, you weren't coming home anytime soon, because most of them went for anywhere from 30 to 60 days. We had one young lady that stayed 90 days in jail simply because she was kind of mouthy, but she was a wonderful friend. But there's a lot of individual stories that there be, and what motivate the people. And even now in our old age, they're still rebels and still want to make America better. And one of the things that happened, and I want America to know, is many of the white Freedom Riders were disinherited from their family. Their families were upset because they were Freedom Riders. And they even cut out the wills, and many of them are working and dying in poverty because they don't have attachments to their families or wealth. And that's what's sad. And then what SNCC, one of the things they tried to do at the 50 was to try to find a way they can put together an annuity or some way where we can help those of our fellow Freedom Riders and activists to at least live out their last days in some kind of semblance of normalcy, because you cannot live off Social Security. And I know of several who now they bounce back because now they get speaking engagement. I've done speech engagement with several of them who were in very dire straits, but now with like I says, with King Week coming up here next month and Black History Month, they make enough to tide them over. And it's getting to the point that even now, all throughout the year, we get an opportunity to speak. And the money isn't like it is for some of those high-powered speakers where they can command, but it's enough to make the trip worthwhile and also to get the message out there, get their story out there.
Well, now, have you continued to be active in the civil rights movement since those days?
Well, I'm active in a indirect way. I used to tutor at my church, and I also did Boy Scouts, and Every opportunity I get to speak, I do.
Do you need to get that?
No.
Okay. We'll have to wait till.
Call from Charles Person.
That's my daughter.
If you want to get it, go ahead. I mean,
Charles.
is the phone right there?
No, they don't worry about it. She'll call her mother.
Okay.
Hello. Thanks so much for calling. We're sorry we cannot come to...
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I think we've covered the actual incident pretty well. So obviously, if the more you believe in the concept of nonviolence on a global scale, in terms of not wanting war or any kind of, in other words, you obviously believe that nonviolence works. Because I guess looking back on when segregation Jim Crow was still so brutally enforced, what would have been the alternative to nonviolence? Violence, then it would have led to a race war, and they had more guns.
Well,
they have more guns now.
Well, yeah, but back then though, the reason it wouldn't work is look at the Panthers. The Panthers had a lot of good programs. But when they armed themselves, that gave the opposition a means to wipe them out. I don't know if you're familiar with the move out of Philadelphia. Same thing happened to them. So what you have to realize, when you take up arms, it justifies the opposition to come after you. Even though no matter what good you're doing in the community. And right now, sis, even though we have open carry, if you walk downtown Atlanta with an AR-15, nobody say anything. But you let me walk down there with an AR-15. And that just shows you how the mentality is today. Like when I talk about, weapons, and, I'm a Second Amendment, right? I used to be a card carrier member.
Okay, we should hold on just a second.
It's just gonna.
Hey.
From having a really great first interview. Yeah, that's interesting, so if I'm walking down carrying an M16 or whatever, that's one thing, but if an African American does it, suddenly it's a terrorist situation.
Even in an open carry state. See, that's what I'm saying. It was where the comedy comes in, the fact that it's an open carry state, which means that anyone. Like I said, I get all upset when I go there's a public store here, and when people come in packing. I know that the security gets a little bit leery, because you don't know what that person means well or not. And they want to blame all these incidents on people who have mental illnesses, and that's not so.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean. Well, one thing that disturbs me is kind of a little bit not non sequitur, but I read that the FBI considers the Black Lives Movement and some of the people associated with it to be linked with terrorism. And that's wild to me that you have all these ministers who are now terrorists. I mean, just like with COINTELPRO, that their attitudes, they don't seem to be too worried about these white nationalists, terrorizing Charlottesville.
But see, that's why I want to discredit the movement, because the Black Lives Movement is just like the NFL kneeling. It has nothing to, there's no. One of the things is that you have nonviolent direct action, and you have violent direct action. But most of us choose nonviolent direct action, which means you have petitions, you have marches, you have sit-ins, and all those kind of ends and things. But it's basically all nonviolent means of civil disobedience. You have, like during the labor movement, you had a lot of things that they would carry their axe handles or whatever and raid a place, but they still got people's attention. The purpose of a demonstration is to piss people off. If you're not making people upset, your movement is not going to work. You got to get people involved, either pro or con, And this way, then you have a dialogue. You have a reason to dialogue. And right now, that's what we need to do more than anything, is we need that open of a national conversation on race. And what I recommend is something like they did in South Africa, and in the Truth and Reconciliation. Reason being, everybody, pro or con, has something to say. And I'm saying, I may not agree with you, but I need to hear what you're thinking. Because, if there's something that can be corrected, we can correct it together. But when I don't know why you feel the way that you do, like some people will say the reason they've been so hard on blacks in education, we messed up the school. Well, no, we didn't mess up the school. They've got all kinds of reasons. But throughout our history, you see, whenever we make strides in education, there are other impediments thrown in. For example, affirmative action used to be a good program, and most people don't understand what affirmative action really was because it's been so polluted. Well, I don't know what you call it, what's happened to it. But what it meant is that if you and I had very similar credentials, because of the circumstances, that I would get an up. But it doesn't say that I'm going to be way underneath you. Like, for example, when I came back and applied to college here in Atlanta, Clayton State College, minority scholarships required an SAT of 700. But if you were an early student, it required an SAT of 1100. Well, I wasn't going to take a minority scholarship because my SAT was a lot higher. But see, the thing is, that's where affirmative action is wrong. And I could understand how someone would get upset that here's someone for a 700 SAT gets a slot over a person who has an 1100 or higher. So there have been a lot of problems. But see, even that was screwed up because, for example, when blacks started getting good grades at your better schools, what happened? White kids started taking AP courses. So instead of graduating with a 4.0, all of a sudden you got someone for 4.2, 4.5. So they just made affirmative action not work because all of a sudden you got this a GPA that's higher than the normal standard of 4.0. And but if you go back, I can go instant after instant how things have changed. In other words, it's like when Tiger Woods tore up the Masters. He ran a course record. What, 12 shots over? What do? They go out and modify the course. So nobody will do that. They hope nobody will do that again. And the same thing in education. As we make strides, things are changed. And it just makes it so difficult because education is basically the key. You would think that in a country like ours, you would want an educated populace. But that's not the case. Because you need those people that flip the burgers and, do those kinds of things.
They want a compliant country. What would you say to young people now, like college to to the new generation in terms of, do you think they're motivated to fight for change, or how are you feeling about young people?
Well, when I speak to them, I try to motivate them for change. One of the first things I say to them is this. I say, before you left home today, you were not aware by the time the day is over that you, as an individual, have the ability to change the world. And we must let our kids know that they have unique abilities in this country. Most of the time, they're beaten down by statistics. The Asians are better than American students. This group is better than American students, da-da-da-da. But yet and still, in the American home, there's more technology than you can imagine. And you know yourself, if you got a problem with technology, your iPhone, your iPad, your whatever, if it's electronic, who do you see? Call a kid. They'll fix it. Kids not even in high school, they know their way around their cell phone better than you and I. So I encourage them to encourage each other. American kids, there's a lot of bullying on the web, and also, of course, in real life. And I tell them that be encouraging. If your friend does well, go out of your way to congratulate them. You have got to support each other. But you're saying that he thinks he's all that, or she thinks, when you have those kind of attitudes. But I say you got to be a cohesive, because right now all you have is each other. And I think if we as adults, whether it's my kids, or even in my church, when kids do something well, I go out of my way, me and my walker, to go over and tell them, good job, keep up the good work. And I think this is what we have to let the young people know, that, hey, yeah, things may be difficult, but you can be successful. And there are those of us who will support you in all your endeavors, you know. And I think when we adults start doing our kids like that, you're going to see a better product, because they're so self-conscious. A lot of them are. The majority of them are.
Yeah, right. Well, they're awfully caught up in their devices.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're right.
You know, and that's frustrating.
Yeah.
You know, we both teach, so we get tired of the cell phone problems and all that business. You know, of being, and also learning how to work together. They're kind of selfish.
Teamwork. Yeah.
They've been trained to be selfish. You know, so it's all about what they can do.
Yeah, it's me.
They don't know in terms of community. That's hard. I think it's also hard for a lot of the idea, like going on a picket line. Though they watch a movie about when people were being sprayed with the fire hoses, but to actually go out there and do it, that's a little different.
I think there's several white lecturers who on the circuit who have some very good demonstrations to help young kids see what it's like. See, the thing is that, like I say, you can read it and you can talk about it, but when you feel it, when you watch this, I don't know if you've heard of the blue-eye, brown-eye demonstration that one of the teachers have been doing for some time, and where, you know, in school that the ones that say blue eyes have all the privilege and so forth, and she said even in a short period of time, if she tell the brown eyes are not very smart, in simple procedures they normally would be able to accomplish, because they've been told that you're not as smart as you think you are. And it manifests itself even in a short demonstration like that. So that's why my goal is, and a lot of my friends who are freedom riders, when we go out our way to speak to young people, and we probably do too many pro bono things, but we realize it's important, especially if our expenses are minimal.
Right.
That, I can't travel to California and on my own, because I was invited to D.C., and the last time she and I went to D.C., it cost me about $4,000, and I said, no, I ain't doing that again.
$4,000. Yeah.
We went there. The Department of Education was having a program. They were to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and they invited us up, and it was a good trip. I got a chance to meet some wonderful young people, but see, the young people had to pay their own way too, and. I don't think they provided. The only thing they provided when we made the bus trip down to Virginia, they provided sandwiches, and they got mine wrong. And I'm kind of finicky about certain things, and so they had to stop off someplace at one of these sandwich places to get me a sandwich because all the others were.
Well, now, so you met some of the icons. You met Dr. King.
Oh yeah. C.T. Vivian, all the biggies of the 60s, some were close, some not so close, because some had, like Roy Wilkins and something with the NAACP, they didn't do much. See, a lot of those guys didn't do much in the South. That's why Dr. King deserves a tremendous amount of credit. Malcolm X was a great guy, and he when he would come to the South, he was like in and out, and he had the fruits of Islam protecting him. But he realized that it wasn't easy being a black person in the South, and
you met John Lewis.
Well, I helped John campaign when he was first elected representative here. That's the only male I have really supported heavily. I mostly been helping women candidates ever since I came back to the States. So, I retired in Cuba, and then I lived there. For 3 years after I retired from the Marine Corps.
Well, you lived in Cuba?
Yeah.
What year?
And Guantanamo Bay. From 81 to 84, I came back to the States. I retired in 1981, yeah. But I loved it there. And I was so happy when Obama tried to normalize relationships, because the Cuban people and, we made friends with Red China and Russia and even Vietnam. And we still having trouble with Cuba, which is 90 miles away. That makes no sense.
Right. Oh, okay. So, yeah.
I got like 18% on the battery here. Let me switch it up.
Okay, I think we're.
That was Dr. King's last major endeavor prior to the Memphis thing. And I volunteered to the president of SCLC. And I was happy, but I know they wanted someone with Reverend Barber's speaking ability and also his organizational skills. But I was hoping they would have kicked it off earlier because I don't know what Reverend Barber's thrust is, but the idea behind the Poor People's Campaign was poverty affects Native Americans, Latino, blacks, poor whites, and on and on and on. And that was a coalition he's trying to build that let them know that poverty affects them all in the same way. You know, it's not, you're not responsible for your being in poverty. There are other circumstances. So I'm hoping he's being successful. But there's a lot of talent out there that they could use to help him be more successful in the Poor People's Campaign because, and I don't know what his relationship is with the Native Americans in North Carolina, because I have a lot of friends, Native American friends in North Carolina, Cherokee, and just wondering if he has touch base with that particular group because they're essential, because even though they have reservations, there's still a lot of drugs and alcoholism and stuff.
And there's the Lumbee group around near the Tar Heel plant near Pembroke, North Carolina. In fact, one of the people in the film, we had one guy named Oliver.
You said Pembroke?
Pembroke, yeah.
My friends from, they named their publishing company after Pembroke.
That's interesting. Oh, well, this is quite interesting. They talk about a apropos book. Oh, this is out of Atlanta. This publisher.
Yeah, but they were born
there at Pembroke.
Yeah.
Wow, I need to get a hold of this book. Somewhere listening to my name. Are there any other things you'd like to share with us? I mean, you're looking at, I think you can tell the thrust of the. I think we've got some great stories. It's always interesting to meet somebody of great courage, such as yourself, and we always wonder why is it that some people are more willing to do dangerous things than other people. It's always much easier to say, well, I mean, even Dr. King, it sounds like, was telling you you shouldn't go on down there, but you did anyway. So you were willing to basically face anywhere up to being killed. I mean, that was certainly a possibility, or really hurt for life. Were there any long-term physical effects for you from being beaten that day?
Well, just the fact that I did develop that huge knot at the back of my skull, and also now I noticed that even just yesterday there's tenderness there, and I said, damn, I had noticed that. So but the doctors I had an MRI several months back, and they said that there was some residual damage there. So, but I had noticed the tenderness down. I noticed that last night. I was just kind of wow. So. But other than that, no. Otherwise, I'm just. It keeps me motivated because I know that things can be better, and I think a lot of it is a lack of. We don't have that communication. We don't have that. We haven't had that talk, and I think one of the things about Ferguson and all those episodes that happened is that white parents don't have to worry about their kids coming home at night from an encounter with being stopped by the police. And even now, our kids my youngest is 31. I still worry about them when they're out at night because, things happen. And the kids now of all ilk know they have rights. But see, the thing, if it's one-on-one with a cop who doesn't, appreciate that fact. And then policing as a rule is what has caused a problem. For example, here in Georgia, Atlanta, there's only one cop to a car. And I know if, let's say, a 135-pound female cop alone in the car comes up on the scene, and the brother is as big as, and he doesn't want to go, she can't make him go. Whereas before you had 2 cops in a car, you instantly got backup. But now you have all these cars there, and each car has 1 police person. And the thing is, you go and sending a policeman to a hostile environment by him or herself, you're only asking for trouble. We didn't have that problem. And like when policing for blacks in this city, for example, we started off, we had 6 black cops, and they couldn't arrest white people. They can only arrest black people. So if they found a situation where a white was acting up or doing something, they had to call, not for backup, but for someone there to come over and make the arrest or do whatever. So, some policemen can be very abrupt and, provoking. We used to call it provoking thoughts and gestures. In fact, the Marine Corps had a lot, when we were having problems with race in the Marine Corps, that was the thing, provoking thoughts and gestures. Cops can do that. They can be very intimidating. And nothing is more irritating when you know you're right, you haven't done anything wrong, and someone is accusing you. I mean, it's on human nature to, but I just say, bite your tongue, and, I'd rather have you home safely than to have you in the morgue.
Some of the videos that have come out where these cops just demand instant submission, and they're insane. I mean, there was that horrible thing recently with that guy in the hallway, actually is like, what is it that, you wonder about some of the people that want to go into law enforcement. Why is it they are going into it? It may be for the wrong reasons.
Well, they said that several years back that a lot of Klansmen and white supremacists was going into law enforcement. And it's hard because in many cities, it's hard just to get in cops, period. So you start scraping the bottom of the barrel. But like I said, then again, it's education. It's education. It's like you're blaming the victim. You live in this neighborhood. Take an example of the neighborhood I grew up in. Many of the streets were unpaved. The houses were tiny. And in my neighborhood, there were no lawns. You couldn't cut grass in the summertime. And the street was unpaved. You had cobblestones there, but out of that neighborhood grew some pretty decent people. But if you look at the circumstances, you would say, wow, how could anything good come out of a community like this? And if you go in with the attitude that everybody in there is a criminal and da-da-da-da-da, you're going to have your logic is tainted, and you're liable to make an assumption that that's not true. So.
Well, would you consider yourself an optimist in general?
Yeah, the best. America is best when it works together, and I know that. And you know that whenever there's a hurricane or a tornado or something, what happens? What do Americans do? You roll up your sleeves, you get the job done, but after it's over, we go back to our old ways, and that's the problem. Why can't we be nice most of the time? If we were nice most of the time, there's no country in the world that could compete with us. No one. Because we can get it done with little or nothing,
Well, like Houston, aftermath of that hurricane there were great. All these people from the bayou who did better than the FEMA people did, saving people.
Yeah.
That was very heartwarming, I mean, I think we have all the right stuff, but there has been that undercurrent of racism throughout our history.
Oh no, it's real. I guess the racism, but I think it's finger pointing. Why does someone have to be blind? Why does you have to be? Like in a relationship, why am I always wrong, or why is she always wrong? No, it's not like that. And I think Congress has taught us how not to compromise and how not to cooperate. Here these guys they're so much smarter than the rest of us, and they pass bills that affect so many of us in a negative way, and they can't see it. But then when you realize when someone who has not had to work or knows someone who's trying to live off Social Security or food stamps, they don't know these people on a one-to-one basis, so they have no idea what these people are going through. So they're sitting from their position of comfort, and they're making laws that affect all of us. And one of the things that I would do if I had the ability to do anything in this country if I could do this, if I would have the ability to say every person who's elected to Congress, either the House of Representatives or the Senate and the presidency, I'd have them make 3 trips. One, I have them make a trip to the war memorials in D.C., make a trip to a VA hospital, and make a trip to one of our bigger inner city slums. Then you go to Washington, be sworn in, and then you can start making laws. But I think that if you had that as a backdrop, you'd have a better understanding of what it's like to be in America and not the comforts of your upbringing or your college.
I do think there's also a vilification of poor people, of working people, that somehow that's all they're good for is to flip burgers, you know, and so there's a real class war going on right now where that's why they're doing these terrible things with that tax bill and so on and so forth, you know. And
unions were the reason the unions they've been fighting unions since the 30s. They don't realize that the strength that the union brings, and people don't realize that a lot of benefits we have as workers, if it had not been for unions, boy, you still have sweatshops, you have child labor, and all the other things that unions did away with, or helped to do away with.
Right. So. Well, this has been terrific. Is there anything else you'd like to add to the interview before we wrap it up?
No, that's about all.
Well, I really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful experience to meet you, and it's an honor.
Well, I've talked to you on several occasions and watched some of your films, so I feel like there's a kinship to them.
Oh, yeah. I've been doing these films for a long time. Yeah. I believe in these films, and I think these films do good.
Yeah.
So that's what's on. I don't care if it's a screen in a church with 30 people who are changed. We've had screens where they sing along at the end of the movie with "We shall not be moved" and "We shall overcome." It's like, it's a spiritual experience. And I do. There's one. I'm like Columbo. You know that old TV. Yeah. He's out the door, sir. I forgot to ask. You know, and that question is this: You're obviously a religious person, a spiritual person. Mm-hmm. What about the relationship between faith, like in God, and your work as a civil rights activist or the movement? Because, you know, in the film, as you saw in Union Time, Reverend Barr was part of it, Reverend Nelson Johnson, a beloved community in Greensboro, a number of ministers were very, if it hadn't been for the churches and the NAACPs, it wasn't enough just to have a fight at the plant. They needed the community involved. They even called, there's a name for that, civil rights unionism, where you have to have the whole community come together. What about for you? I mean, your faith in God, how has that affected your life as an activist?
Well, it's very important because, I was first baptized and confirmed in the Episcopal Church. And the reason for that is that they were the only group at the time that was practicing what they preached. That's why, if you knew Bishop Pike, he was a radical Episcopal bishop out in California. And we had a couple of other bishops of the same ilk who was really for civil rights and for human rights. And so it plays a very important part. I don't get caught up in the dogma of a lot of churches. I'm not, I can respect your spirituality and respect you as a person, but I'm not hung up on a lot of the frills and what I call frills and so forth. I know the black church has not been as vocal, I think, as it should have been. For years, it never had made any definitive discussion about homosexuality and all the other issues that confront modern society. The black church has skirted those issues. They've never taken a real stand on it, and even a lot now, because America is so wealthy, we have mega churches which make tons of money, and they're doing what they give the community to give back is peanuts. If I had my I think all churches should give a tithe to their communities, give back to the communities. And the reason I say that, if you look at taxation, when you look at the average city in America, and you look at who pays taxes, you wonder why the little old white guy or little old black guy or white woman or white and female who's working their butts off, paying their taxes, and then you look at the rest of society who's not paying taxes because you got the disabled, the unemployed, the homeless, the ones who are not making a living wage. You got your 1%ers who paying a minimal of taxes, and you got that whole group of folks in the middle there who's paying taxes for everybody else. And you wonder why people get upset. And that was the outline. I think I had about 15 groups in the average city that pays no taxes. And then it leaves just that small portion in the middle that pays their taxes, that's carrying the rest of us. And with like this new thing that there will be some relief for some people, but people don't realize, the average American don't realize why we pay taxes in the first place. And the thing is that if we don't do something about our bulging military budget, like for example, why do we give foreign aid to a country that's able to provide free health care for its citizens, and we can't? It makes no sense. But if you look at our military budget, and we can't fight the wars for everybody in the world, and we could have that budget, and we could have free education, and you could have free health care. And I don't mean socialized, I mean you could have it where it's manageable. Because when you speak socialism, people get all upset, and I don't know why everybody sucks up to Bernie Sanders. What he advocates could never happen in this country, but not. I don't think the majority would support him. Unfortunately, I mean, he has good ideas, but he would have to modify them to sell it to the American people. But other than that, religion is very important, and the thing is, I don't get hung up on it because, like I said, this fight we got against Muslims and other non-Christians, and then what I can't understand, I told my wife, I'm beginning to doubt my Christianity, because how can you be an evangelical Christian and support Donald Trump? And I asked a group of that. I meet with a group of kids from Denmark, and they were with some of Trump's supporters on election night, and they were surprised that he won. But I asked them, how did they resolve the fact that Trump had said this, all the things that he said and supposedly done and admitted to doing? How could they support him? How they could forgive him and they did not forgive Hillary? And in their twisted mind, somehow there was no forgiving for her, but all the world for him. So
that's a conundrum.
So.
Anyway, all right, good.
That's enough.
It's a wrap,
Yep.
and that.